going to talk about dahlias and the various ways of starting dahlias off, and the results that you get from each. These are dahlia seeds. Quite immature, and these are taken from, I'll show you in a moment, these are taken from a dried flower rather than a flower that was allowed to go on long enough to produce mature seeds. So if you are collecting seeds from a dahlia at the end of the season, you have allowed the flower to dry out and become mature. This was picked before that stage, so this is an immature plant. We won't get viable seeds from this. But let's say you've allowed the petals to die off and you're left with the head of the dahlia, and then you can see, you can identify individual seeds, each of which is attached to one floret. So a dahlia flower is made up of lots of florets, lots of small flowers. The central florets or seeds are the most fertile, so they're the ones you would tend to pick. These are just not ready, but hopefully you get the idea. There's a seed attached at the base of each of these florets. There they are. Now, if you're going to grow dahlias from seed, they can be grown from seed. That's fine, but it's rare to do so. And the reason for that is that the plant that you get from seeds will not be true to the original plant. So if you put like a particular variety and you get some seeds at the end of the season, you think, I'll grow that variety again. Once they grow, there's no telling what you're going to get. It'll almost certainly be not the same colour, not the same size as the plant it was collected from. So it's a bit of a fun thing to do, really, to grow dahlia seeds. You can grow them in the ordinary way in a seed tray, let them grow, prick them off, and then plant them up, and then just wait and see what you get. So that's fine. It's obviously no good for us as a flower farm. We need to know what we're going to get. And by far the majority of dahlias are grown from vegetative propagation, in other words, asexual propagation by using tubers. These were tubers which on a previous video I demonstrated how to store last year's tubers. How to store last year's tubers in cling film, which preserves them, stops them drying out. So what we'll end up with here is a collection of individual tubers, each of which will produce an adult plant. It's now just the first week in February, so the chances of me actually seeing an eye when I couldn't see one when I did the original cut is actually quite low. As the plant warms up, these have been stored at about between 7 and 9 degrees centigrade, so that's fine for them. They mustn't freeze, of course, and if the temperature warms up, let's say 15, 16, 17 or so, they will start to put cuttings out, put shoots out, which will come from this part of the plant. And at some stage we'll be able to see swelling around about here somewhere, which will then become a shoot. That could be one. That's a bit damaged. Just can't see anything to say that's definitely an eye. Planting up an individual tuber, you will get larger flowers, but not so many. So if you're perhaps growing for an exhibition and size matters for you, then single tubers is the way to go. The reason for that is that when you get a plant growing from a single tuber with one or two stems, all of the available soil and nutrients are going to go into that one stem. You will then get necessarily a smaller number of flowers than in one of the other methods which we'll talk about. These are the tubers that we get for the flower farm in bulk from our supplier, J. Parker's. So these are all one variety. In this case they are preference dahlia, and they come nicely packaged, and that is one collection of dahlia tubers which will become one plant. Another one. You can see from this the previous year's stems. There were 3 stems here. These arrived 3 or 4 days ago. I opened the plastic bags to allow them to breathe a little, and we'll keep them in the dark and in the cool, and when we're ready to set them off they will go into larger pots than this, but they will go into a pot which will be protected from freezing until our last frost date, which is something like last week in May. They'll have then grown on quite nicely, and they'll be ready to put into the ground. What I've got here is a mother tuber which I planted in, I think it was beginning of November actually. I just popped it in some soil to see what would happen. So this is a mother tuber, so that's the tuber which produced plants flowers last year, and as part of the division process, which is on another video, we got these single tubers. We cut this year's tubers away from last year's tuber, called a mother tuber, and rather than waste it, I just popped it in a pot to see what would happen. Kept it on the mat and under the light, and what we've got here now then is a dahlia which has put out some shoots. Whether we're going to use them, I don't know really. It's a bit too early to get them started off now, but hopefully you can see each shoot here. Each shoot could be taken now and planted and would grow on to become a new plant. So we've got tuber collections, in this case commercially grown. We've got individual tubers. These were divided from our own stock at the end of last season. There's a video showing how it was done. And we've also got seeds. So we've got 3 sorts of starting point for getting our dahlias going. The advantages and disadvantages of each. Well, we talked about seeds. Advantages, well, it's a very cheap way of propagating. It's more interesting and fun for somebody who is a gardener rather than a commercial organisation. Disadvantage, you just don't know what sort of dahlia you're going to get at the end of the day. Single tubers. Advantages of those are that, again, you can multiply your stock. So these, if we don't count that, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, often you get up to 12 individual tubers from one plant. So it's a way of multiplying your stock. When you do come to plant it up, and there's different ways of doing that, which we'll come on to, when you do come to plant it up, the plant that you'll get will have one or possibly two stems. It will be a virile plant in itself, producing large flowers, but not so many flowers because there are fewer stems. For the collection of tubers, the advantage of these is that they will produce many more flowers than the single tuber. We will get maybe 5 or 6 stems coming from one tuber. The disadvantage of that is that the individual flowers that this dahlia will produce will be smaller because there are more stems competing for the same amount of soil nutrients in the soil. In many ways, and for cut flowers, it's an advantage to have smaller dahlias. Very large dahlias are not particularly well. Smaller dahlias are better for arrangements, etc. Now, the final question for you to answer, choice for you to make, is how you actually plant them up. For the seeds, it's conventional way, in seed trays. You will get a flowering plant from a seed grown that season. So you plant the seeds up at the normal time for tender seeds, which would be 2 months before your first frost date. So February or March you would start your seeds off. As far as the tubers go, single tubers are usually planted in a pot to get them started, like so, and you would allow it to grow on until it's planting out time. So this will go into a pot at the end of February, and we'll allow it to grow on without allowing it to freeze, so that we've got a nice sturdy plant to go into the ground last week in May. It's the same for collections of tubers. You can either plant them straight in the ground, they would go in at the frost-free date in May, or you can start them in pots larger than this one. I think most flower producers will start them this way. So in the same way as the single tubers, you allow the plant to grow on nicely and then plant it when there's no risk of frost. There's another way of dealing with dahlias, and that is simply to allow them to stay in the ground, and certainly as the weather warms up, if you're in a region where the ground will not freeze or not freeze deeply, then you can simply leave the tuber in the ground and you'll get another plant next year. That precludes the chance of multiplying your stock, and you could argue that it is more likely to allow disease to get hold because you're not moving the plant. But it's perfectly reasonable, and many people do leave a dahlia tuber in the ground to go on to produce flowers the next year.